Have you ever had an animal encounter that left you with feelings of wonder and amazement? An interaction that seemed to be a little more than a mere random occurrence. Maybe you had feelings of sadness one minute only to see a butterfly land within your eyesight the next. And then maybe you brushed the encounter off as a coincidence or a pleasant surprise. But what if these animal encounters weren't just by chance? What if these encounters actually had a deeper meaning? Welcome to Halfway to Hippie, the podcast where we explore different topics like spirituality, alternative forms of healing, starseeds, alternate dimensions, and so much more. Hi, I'm Annette Schmidt, your host and self-proclaimed wannabe hippie who is on a mission to answer questions like, what exactly is the fifth dimension and how do we get there? Are aliens real or is it all just a government hoax? Oh, and what about psychedelics? Are they actually safe and should we be using them? So buckle up because we are taking a trip to see just how deep the rabbit hole really goes. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today we are going to be discussing the topic of spirit animals, the idea that animals come to us with meaning beyond just a random appearance. Now, I don't know about you, but I will admit that there have been times when animals just seem to appear over and over and over again in my life. Most recently, about a week before launching the podcast, I had actually had a repeat encounter with a hawk. During my initial encounter, I had walked outside towards my cars, and out from nowhere, a hawk swooped down and back up into the trees. I walked over, watched it for a moment, was really impressed because I honestly have never seen a hawk in our neighborhood before, so I really felt like this was a unique gift from nature. And then I went inside, told my husband about it, and thought nothing more of it. The next day, though, my husband went outside first, and when he came back in, he told me the hawk was back. Now, I thought, how cool. We don't normally get hawks in our area, but I didn't think much of it. Then later that same day, after my husband had seen the hawk in the yard, I was driving down a very, very busy street. And as I looked out my window, there, perched on the curb right next to traffic, was a giant, beautiful, majestic hawk. Now, was this a coincidence or some kind of message? I may never know, but it did pique my curiosity enough for me to decide to create an entire podcast episode dedicated to the spiritual side of animals. So in this episode, we will not only discuss the meaning and history of spirit animals, but we will also explore how and why our spirit animals decide to reveal themselves to us. Now, the term spirit animal has become somewhat of a catch-all term over the last few decades, with people claiming celebrities or even alcoholic drinks as their quote-unquote spirit animal. The term has turned into a way for individuals to acknowledge both people and things that they admire or want to embody in their own lives, whether that be Beyoncé's fierce aura or whiskey's relaxed but deadly reputation. However, for today's episode, we are going to focus less on the pop culture side of the topic and more on the spiritual side. Let's get started by clearly defining what a spirit animal is. In essence, a spirit animal is a teacher, messenger, omen, or guide who is here to help us in some area of our life. And in some cultures, they are thought to be the literal spirits of animals that we adopt at some point in our lives. While in various schools of psychology, they are thought to be the archetypal or symbolic manifestations of primal psyche. But ultimately, spirit animals are meant to be powerful allies that help us connect with our souls and our higher purpose. For thousands of years, we have honored and admired the characteristics of animals, such as a dog's loyalty, a lion's courage, and even the dung beetle's incredible navigational skills. Also, a fun fact, scientists actually discovered that the dung beetle uses the Milky Way to navigate at night. It's the only known instance in the animal kingdom. And because we admired these characteristics, we would often integrate animals into our spiritual practices. We can see this when looking at ancient Egyptian mysticism, ancient Norse cultures, Native American traditions, as well as Eastern religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism. Throughout history, animals have played a central role in the lives of humans. Not only have we referred to them as symbols of what we want to embody, but they have become our protectors, our teachers, our guides, and even our omens, warning us of impending doom. For thousands of years, we have lived in harmony with animals, thinking of ourselves as one with them and the rest of the planet. However, somewhere along the line, our ancestors' deep connection to animals began to disappear, and we no longer revered them. Spiritual practices were lost or forbidden to be practiced, and our relationship with animals began to take on a more superficial appearance. And this relationship became even more strained after Darwin's theory of evolution. Instead of thinking of ourselves as part of the animal kingdom and Earth's ecosystem, we began to place ourselves above it all. We began to think of ourselves as superior, and we began to lose even more knowledge of ancient practices meant to help us achieve ultimate freedom. But even with this lost knowledge, there are still those who believe spirit animals are essential to helping us along our life journey, whether it's to provide us comfort, protection, or aid us in a spiritual awakening. But don't just take my word for it. Let's take a look at a few firsthand accounts about how animals have provided both guidance and protection to the humans around them. Now, believe it or not, it was actually a bit difficult to find stories about individuals' interaction with their spirit animals. But I dug to the ends of the internet and was able to find a few very fascinating stories. With that said, though, I would love if you could send me a DM on Instagram at halfway.to.hippie if you have a spirit animal story of your own to share. But here are the stories that I did find that I thought were the most compelling and showed just how deep our connection with animals can run. The first account is from the user StingerXX, who posted their story on a conspiracy forum. Last spring, Stinger was in Baltimore, Maryland, and had no place to stay, so he decided to camp out in a little patch of old-growth forest on the outskirts of town. It was raining that day, but the trees provided enough shelter that Stinger was able to make camp and get some sleep. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, Stinger woke up to the feeling of paws gently pressing against his shoulder. The next thing he knew, he could feel claws digging into his back. He instantly jolted upright and turned to look behind him. And there behind him was a little furry animal whose body was about 2 feet long and 8 inches in diameter. Looking at it in the dead of night, he initially thought it was a weasel of some kind. He screamed in surprise, and the creature casually turned and walked away back into the woods. Stinger turned back to go to sleep when suddenly he saw a man dressed in all black who was attempting to approach him. When the man realized that Stinger saw him, he turned and quickly walked away. Is it possible that this small creature saved Stinger from a less than friendly encounter? Now, Stinger also shared a second story of a unique animal encounter he experienced. He was camping during the winter on the outskirts of Cheyenne, Wyoming, when he saw an average-sized black cat walking around a sleeping area. He called to it saying, "Here, kitty, kitty," but it just ignored him and continued to amble around, paying him no attention. Stinger thought nothing of it and quickly fell asleep. Then suddenly, he felt a nudge on his shoulder as if a cat was nuzzling him with its cheek. He woke up, turned around, but didn't see anything, so he turned over and fell back asleep. Later that night, he felt another nudge, and this time it felt a bit more forceful. He instantly got up and turned around to see what it was, but again, he couldn't see anything. So, of course, again, he turned over and tried to just get some more sleep. Now, it wasn't long before he awakened with another nudge to his shoulder, only this time it was enough to lift his entire shoulder off the ground. When he woke up and turned around, he found himself staring at a large black cat at least twice the size of the smaller cat that greeted him earlier in the evening. And he could see the cat's big fleshy paws and hear the gravel crunching beneath its feet. The large feline began walking away towards the woods when suddenly it froze at the sound of coyotes howling close by. Stinger could see the hair standing on the cat's back as it turned and ran away back into the woods. Stinger, not wanting to sleep alone with coyotes, decided to quietly pack up his things and head back to town. Is it possible that this cat was trying to warn Stinger about a nearby danger? Or was the cat just curious about Stinger and his camping spot? Now, the third account is from Sandra Guthrie, who shared how she and her husband were so uncomfortable climbing their ladder to clean their gutters, they ended up hiring a handyman to do it for them. He would come by a couple times a year, pulling out pine cones and needles from their clogged gutters. But when he finally decided to retire, they were worried about being able to find another handyman who did just as good a job as he did. So Sandra and her husband decided to prey on it. A few days later, Sandra glanced out her window as a shower of pine cones came raining down. Initially, she thought nothing of it, but when they drove out of the garage, their windshield became covered in pine cones. They looked up to see where they were coming from and instantly caught eyes of a squirrel who was rooting around the gutters and dislodging all the pine cones. Is it possible that this squirrel was an answer to Sandra's prayer? And if so, who sent them? Or did the squirrel just sense it was needed? So let's take a look at the last account. The last account I want to share with you is a little bit more widely known incident that occurred in Ethiopia. In June 2005, a 12-year-old girl was snatched by 4 men in rural southwest Ethiopia as she made her way home from school. A week after the kidnapping, her captors were attempting to move her with the police in hot pursuit when 3 lions chased the men off. The lions remained with the terrified girl until police arrived to escort her to safety. She told them that although she had been beaten by her kidnappers, who it is believed had been attempting to sell her into a forced marriage, the lions had not touched her. Sergeant Juan Muwadaj said, "They stood guard until we found her, and then they just left her like a gift and went back into the forest. Everyone thinks this is some kind of miracle because normally the lions would attack people." An Ethiopian wildlife expert claimed that the lions may have spared the girl because her cries had sounded like the mewing of a cub. Now, while these stories could be explained away by coincidence or luck, is it possible that these animals were actually an answer to a prayer? Is it possible that these animals were drawn to these people on an energetic level? When considering the question of how spirit animals reveal themselves, one theory may be that animals are drawn to us due to the law of resonance, which states that the rate of vibration projected will harmonize with and attract back energies with the same resonance. In fact, it's been proven that both humans and animals emit certain frequencies. So, is it possible then that during times of deep trauma, turmoil, and grief, as well as times of intense happiness and joy, we are emitting a frequency that is harmonized with the animal that matches that exact frequency? According to science, this is entirely possible. It has been proven that everything in the universe is in motion and is therefore vibrating, and it's the rate of these vibrations that determine the frequency. So everything in the universe is humming to its own tune, including plants and animals. And when I say animals, this includes everything from the great big blue whale to the teeny tiny gnat. All animals emit a frequency, and therefore all animals can either be attracted to or repelled from us. And not only that, but frequencies can be disrupted and influenced by other frequencies. They are not static or permanent, but instead they can change depending on the frequencies they interact with. Now, physics explains this by considering that all objects have a natural frequency or set of frequencies at which they vibrate. And each frequency is made up of 2 factors, speed and wavelength. And each of these 2 factors are determined by a number of underlying factors themselves. So if any of the underlying factors change, that would in turn alter the speed or wavelength, ultimately changing the frequency of the vibration. We can see an example of this in real time when we consider musical instruments like the guitar. The wavelength of any given guitar string is determined by the underlying tension of the string. If you alter the tension, you alter the wavelength, and ultimately you change the natural frequency of the guitar. It's the same idea with living things. If we alter the underlying factors such as mood, nutrition, environment, etc., then you are ultimately altering a person's frequency. And the same is true with animals, meaning not only can we change the rate at which animals vibrate by affecting their mood and overall well-being, but they can also change ours. And not just by performing heroic acts like intervening during life-threatening situations, but in more subtle manners as well. A specialist in the field of bioacoustics named Elizabeth von Muggenthaler was able to measure and quantify the cat's purr. Now, it turns out the average domestic cat has a multi-frequency purr that ranges between 25 to 150 hertz. And recent research has shown that frequencies between 20 to 50 hertz can actually increase bone density and relax stubbornly tense muscles in not only cats, but humans as well. And in fact, pulsed electromagnetic field devices with frequencies within the range of the cat's purr have been shown to non-invasively treat a variety of biological maladies, such as bone healing, osteoarthritis, inflammation, wound healing, and postoperative pain. Science is proving that frequencies emitted by animals can greatly impact humans' physical health. So maybe our ancestors were actually onto something. Maybe they had a better understanding of our universe than we have today by recognizing the role that animals play in our lives and honoring them for it. And this theory may also explain why those who are searching for their spirit animal are recommended to sit in meditation. Is it possible that when we enter a deep meditative state with the intention of connecting with the animals around us, that we are then able to send out our own version of a prayer, drawing the animal towards us? But once we discover them and the synchronicities begin showing up in our life, then what? What does it mean if you almost hit a deer only to see a TV program for caribou later that day and to then go shopping and find antlers hanging on the wall? What does all of this mean? These signs are much less subtle than the big black cat, the handyman squirrel, or the courageous lions. So how do we decipher them? Well, the first answer that many would think of is Google. Just type in the animal plus symbol and meaning and voila, at your fingertips, instant response. However, after spending a few minutes searching through the different Google results, you're likely to come across conflicting information and meanings. And that's because the symbolism and meaning of spirit animals is unique to each person's interpretation of them. The meaning of a bear differs between the Norse and the Native American cultures, just like the meaning of the cat will differ between the ancient Egyptians and Wiccans. Instead, maybe you're meant to look within and trust your own intuition about what this animal means to you. Maybe seeing a deer means freedom, or maybe it's a sign of anxiety. You know, the saying, a deer in headlights. Consider what is going on in your life and how this animal reflects that when trying to decipher your meaning. Or, if all else fails, trust the Google. So while spirit animals have become an overly popularized term that reflects our materialistic desires, it's important to remember that our connection with animals runs much deeper. It transcends our ego and is meant to provide us with raw, true experiences of our reality from a different perspective. And perhaps animals are not only here to guide and teach us, but maybe they're also here to help us heal both physically and spiritually. Maybe their presence in our lives is less about telling us what we don't know and more about reflecting to us what we already know to be true. Now, we must first look within, or we may forever go without. So, what do you think? Does the appearance of animals have meaning beyond random events? Is it possible that animals are drawn to us on a spiritual and energetic level? Or is it all just a coincidence after all? Let me know by leaving a review or sending a DM on Instagram at halfway.to.hippie.